we could slowly introduce ourselves and get started. I'll start up the mic.
Okay.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Just real quick before we introduce ourselves, if you haven't already gone to this URL here, please go there now on your laptop. It's a gist with information about. There's a couple of repos you should clone and do an npm install, and hopefully by the time you get through a few slides, your npm install will be complete, and you can jump into the actual workshop piece of it. To get things started, this is the Intro to Web Components and Polymer workshop. I am John Riviello. This is Chris.
I'm Chris Lorenzo.
We both work at Comcast, as we mentioned, in Philadelphia. So we took a nice long trip out here. Happy to be here. This is a pretty amazing conference so far. Thank you for coming to listen about this technology that we've been using for a number of years at Comcast now, and it's becoming even more relevant even today. We are hiring at Comcast, so if you're interested in coming out to Philadelphia or New York, we've got some openings there.
And John, we are in Canada, so they might not know
we are.
Comcast is.
That's true. So Comcast is
one of the largest TV internet providers in America.
And they just bought Sky, so now it's also.
And yeah, we just bought Sky Media. So if you're from Europe, you probably know of Sky.
And they also work with a bunch of cable operators in Canada. So like Shaw is one of them that we've been working on. So like the interface that Comcast has, we release that out to other companies like Shaw and other companies.
Yeah, it's a big place. Fortune 50 company with like 30 million customers, roughly 30 million. I think a little under that. So now that we have Sky, it's probably more than that.
That's true. But that interests you in Philly sounds good or New York sounds good, please talk to us about that. But we're here for you to talk about web components and Polymer. So again, go to this URL, node.js int-polymer-workshop. Get some stuff there. So we're here to talk about web components. So what are web components? Why are you here? You decide to spend the next couple hours learning about this. It's not a lot of time. What could we instill you with? So at the very core, web components are a set of web platform APIs that allow you to create these custom reusable encapsulated HTML tags for your web pages or web applications. They're built on a set of standards. They work in all modern browsers, some natively, some with a polyfill. They can be used with any JavaScript library or framework that you're using today. Some with varying degrees of difficulty, some that just works piece of cake, others need to kind of massage a little bit, but these are things you can use regardless of the framework and actually use them across multiple frameworks, or even without a framework. So I mentioned that there are standards involved with these web components. There are 4 specs that make up the at least original set of web component specs. The first being custom elements. So taking a quick look at this, you see the code part here. There's some things called paper tabs and paper tab. Those aren't in HTML5, obviously. But you can go ahead and create your own tags now using custom elements. And that can provide certain behaviors, like see as we click through the different tabs at the top, you get a different kind of UI effect there as you click on them. That could have something change below it, potentially. And you can do this with just adding an HTML tag to your page. So this is a way to build your own fully featured DOM elements, and it gives you, the web developer, the power to go ahead and then create these, and also consume ones that have been created by other web developers, which is really powerful. The next piece of the original set of web component specs is HTML imports. So that is basically, if you were to look at the code behind this, there is a link with a rel of import you could use, and that will import a set of HTML that then can contain CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. This is basically the original way of importing custom elements. It's great because you can then put all of this in HTML. We've been writing HTML for years now. We can put our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and import that into one thing. And then just have the browser include that. And that has built-in deduplication. So if you were to use one HTML import, and then you have another element that imports that same HTML import, the browser will then know that it doesn't need to download that twice. Unfortunately, the browser vendors couldn't really agree on this, so we'll get to what that means for the reality of using web components today. But it's kind of important to know about this because if you look at existing open source web components, you may see HTML imports being used, and you want to know how you can actually go ahead and use that and take advantage of them. The third is templates. So templates have been in browsers for a while now. It's simply just a template tag, so it is in HTML5. It's just right there. You can see it's a template. You can then put any sort of HTML you want in there, CSS, HTML, JavaScript, like usual. And if you put a template tag on your page alone, it will do absolutely nothing, not a single thing. That's Chris's favorite element. It doesn't do a damn thing. But what you can do then, with the advantage of this, why would you actually want to do this, is you can then clone that with JavaScript. You can reference it. Like here, you can see a template with an ID on it. You would just do getElementById tab. And then you have a reference to this HTML markup that's already been parsed in advance by the browser. And then when you want to go ahead and then manipulate that and then insert it into your DOM, it's going to be much faster than if you were to go ahead and create a string in JavaScript and then try to insert that into the DOM. So this is really just for speed reasons is why you want to use the template tag. And last and most powerful is the shadow DOM. So the shadow DOM is pretty sweet. So the shadow DOM allows you to, when you're creating, often used with custom elements, but doesn't need to be with custom elements. If you go in, you can right here and inspect, for example, the paper tabs element, you'll see this shadow root. If you open up the shadow root, you'll see these different elements that are part of this paper tabs element. But if you were to just look at paper tabs without the shadow root, you wouldn't actually see those elements. So this is actually a way to use these building blocks and hide them from developers that want to use them. So you can kind of abstract away all this functionality in a way that then can provide encapsulation, which is really, really powerful. It also can hide CSS styles as well. This is when we get to the actual building web components from scratch. You'll see how I can actually go ahead and then add some styles to a web component that does not impact the elements around it. And also you can then add CSS to the main page that then, if you want, does not impact the elements inside the shadow DOM. So this is really powerful to have that kind of encapsulation, because this is something we really struggle with CSS is the fact that it's global and really tough to manage with modules. This gives it to you for free. And these have really been around. This concept has been around forever. If you think about a select list, the video element, an input type of date, these have been in HTML for a while, and you as a web developer may have kind of a limited amount of a way to customize them. Perhaps, like there's a -- WebKit prefix to get the ability to style some of them. That's using the shadow DOM before there was shadow DOM. So it's basically using those same concepts and giving you that same power as a web component author to then be able to hide the ability to modify stuff. And then also, there's also ways as well that we'll get to also give developers a way to modify those elements you create if you so choose to.
So here comes the really important question, which everybody should be asking.
Yes, so all that sounds cool, but can we actually use these things?
Can we, John?
And the answer is yes. We've been using it for years, and this has even gotten more exciting. So right now, templates have been around, like I said, for a long time. That's in all the browsers, except for the I11 column on the right will always be a polyfill. HTML imports, I mentioned, there's been a little bit of browser, kerfuffle around that. But custom elements and shadow DOM, really the core pieces of web components. They shipped in Chrome a while ago. Firefox 63, which is, it's the web developer edition. I think it should be stable.
Due for release in, I think, a month or so.
You can use this right now in Firefox. Safari shipped it with 10 and 10.1. And just a couple days ago, Edge announced that they are finally going ahead and actually developing custom elements in shadow DOM. I've been updating this slide for probably like 2 years now, and I've always had the they keep saying they're going to develop
2 days
it.
ago.
Now they've actually committed to yes, we have engineers at Microsoft working on developing these to make them part of Edge. So you can use it in Edge with a polyfill. We use it right now for our millions of customers, and it's successful there. But to have that native capability is going to be really great. So we'll hopefully see that at some point next year. You'll see web components be a reality in Edge, which is going to mean all of our major browsers are going to have it. And since it has Safari and Chrome, that means all of your mobile browsers today already have this built in. So that's why, again, this is really a powerful technology. So I mentioned with HTML imports, there was kind of some debate there about, is this really the right thing? Chrome developers were like, this makes a lot of sense. Other developers of other browsers were like, not so much. So instead, the decision was made to kind of shift away from HTML imports and then move to ES6 modules. So this is actually supported across the board right now in all the browsers. So in Chrome 61, Firefox 60, Safari 10.1, and then Edge with their 16 release also supports ES6 modules. So you can actually, if you wanted to, you could even just put script type equals module and use that without having to Babel or Webpack or do anything fancy to actually get that to work or roll up. Now we're actually do this as part of the workshop. So that's pretty awesome. So that's web components. Google Polymer is definitely another key piece of components. We're going to talk about that in the workshop here. So what is Google Polymer? So the important thing about Polymer is it's not just one thing. It's the Google Polymer project, and that's really has 4 main aspects of it. The first part about that is it's a library that kind of provides some sugar on top of the web components APIs. Think of it kind of like jQuery, but for web components, but not as gigantic as jQuery. Also, the Polymer team is part of the Chrome team at Google, so they're the ones that are going to be going ahead and they're part of the W3C. They're talking to other browser vendors to kind of help push web components forward among other different browsers, and we've seen success there, obviously. They also maintain the web components polyfill, so for browsers that don't support web components natively, there is, as I mentioned, a set of polyfills that then will provide that functionality to those browsers. And last, the Polymer team maintains a set of open source web components. You can find them at webcomponents.org. There you can go ahead, you can browse a bunch of stuff, search for things. They have this concept of collections that is really useful. So we often find ourselves reaching for what's known as the iron elements. These are elements that give you nice behaviors that you just don't want to bother with building yourself. Stuff like modals and dialog boxes. There's some great accessibility web components you can use that they provided here as well. So I definitely recommend checking out, at a minimum, the iron elements collection. Everything else is available at webcomponents.org. The most recent version of Polymer is Polymer 3. This was released earlier in the year. We're going to be using this for our workshop here. So the key things with Polymer 3, it uses those specs for custom elements and Shadow DOM. They've actually been through a couple of revisions. And the most recent one is actually version 1, because they started with version 0. Polymer 3 uses version 1, and it also gets away from HTML imports and then uses ES6 modules for that. So we'll be using that. So with that, we'll just kind of jump right into some coding. So everyone that has a laptop, if you go to this URL here, tinyurl.com/Comcast Polymer map, that should bring you to the spot we'll be actually using the Git repo where you can get some stuff. If you came in late, let me throw up another slide real quick with all the things that you need. So this URL here is, this will give you a gist with the different repos to download. So the way that we're going to do this here, since we don't have a ton of time, we'll walk through. Basically what I'd like to do is I'll go over the very basics of this Polymer Google Map tool that basically allows you to build Google Maps using some open source web components. Once everyone in the room kind of has the basics of that up and running, I'll walk through it, and then we'll get into kind of Chris's walk through how to actually build your own web components from scratch, which will be a lot of fun. So again, go to this URL here, and let me show you what you should be going to. So that URL there on the big orange screen should take you to this gist here. You want to make sure that you've got Node installed. Since we're at JS and Node Interactive, I assume you do. Install the Polymer CLI globally, so npm install -g Polymer CLI. You want to clone this Google Maps code lab, and also this WC Toast repo. Make sure you clone both of those. For this Google Maps API key, I have a key I can share to everyone here, so we can use that. I tested it last night, it was still working, so we should be good for that. So for that key, if you go to, let me show you where I put that up. So if you go to this URL here, tinyurl.com/John API key, that should give you my Google API key. Just don't use it 1,000 times and charge me lots of dollars. But if you're going to go there, copy and paste the API key we can use to actually get you access to Google Maps there. And then we're going to start by going to the Google Maps code lab. And this will give you the repo you need to clone to basically go ahead. And then we're going to, like I said, recreate Google Maps. Once you've cloned it, if you click on the link at the top here, which is comcastsamples.github.io/Polymer Maps, that will bring you to this page here. So this will show you how to actually go ahead. And this is going to have all the steps. Since there's a lot of people here, we don't know everybody's skill level. Basically, what I want to do is make sure that we can get folks up and running. So let's kind of walk through the very beginning. We'll get to a point where then we can kind of let people do some work on their own, and then we'll bring it back together to go over it. So this first page here just goes over what we're going to be building. So we're going to be building Google Maps. It's going to have little start and end directions there with different modes of transportation. That's all you need to know for this first page here. Next, so make sure your environment's set up. So we're going to make sure you have Git installed, Node and NPM. Polymer CLI, I just mentioned all of that, so hopefully all that is up and running on your machine. If not, do that right now. Once you've cloned it, make sure you then cd to your directory and do an npm install there. That will install all the dependencies at once for you. That way you need to go ahead, and then if the Wi-Fi is not so great, it'll download everything in one fell swoop for you there. So once you download that, so basically, does everyone at least at this page here? Anyone not at that page? Raise your hand. Chris can run around.
Yeah. If anybody needs help, just raise your hand and I come around. Also, we're going to be like walking through this, so you don't necessarily have to do it on your own. You can do this offline too, like after the conference, because this workshop is available online. But we're going to walk through it, and it'll be interesting to see what we do when we write code in Polymer.
So basically, what I like is basically if you're at this page, it'll tell you once you do your npm install, you'll run Polymer serve, which we'll just go ahead and run that to see what that does. Just give that a couple seconds, and then once it says this right here, where it says it's running the server, if you go to the main URL there and bring that up, you should see this. Replace this with Polymer elements. So if everyone gets to that point, then at least we'll know we're at a good spot where everyone has a working environment locally. And then from that point, I'll basically step through this step by step. But if you can go ahead, get to that point that you've got Polymer serve working, and then feel free to skip ahead if you want. Like I said, I'll walk through it manually myself, but if you guys just can go ahead and do that. Chris and I will walk around, make sure everybody at least has, at the minimum, their Polymer serve running, and it's serving up that repo. Once we're all in a good spot there, then I'll jump up back on stage, and I'll actually walk through this, each step here with everyone in the room and ask some questions as we go. So
That's great.
if anyone's having trouble right now, raise your hand. Chris and I will walk around real quick, and then I'll jump back up here. There's typically always at least a few, so don't be shy. There's always people who need help. How's the install going for everyone? Is anyone still waiting to install things? Is it good now, or still waiting? Okay. Okay.
Code about it too.
Mhm.
You could ask that as a survey. Who would like to just watch me do
That's
this?
true, yeah. Anybody else having problems besides waiting for the internet to download on their machine with NPM?
Does anybody just want to watch us code this up?
Should I start doing it?
Is that better? Yeah, I like that.
All right, cool. All right, I'll jump up there.
Just go show. And you can also put it on your network as well. No machines are set up. But if you do have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I'll come around and help you.
Yes. And if you have general questions, then I'm sure someone else has the same question, so please ask it. I'm just going to have, let's see, this slide ready for relevant information. So this is in the slides, like I mentioned. So where are we at? So once you npm install, this will be your directory. This should look pretty standard for what you've seen before. You'll have a node modules directory, which is going to be, of course, all your dependencies. Index.html file, which is going to be where we'll be working in. This will be where we're going to build our little app real quick. Package.json, you should know what that is because you're here. If you don't, though, please, we'll talk about that. And there's a styles.css file. We'll just add a few styles to it. So again, the Polymer CLI, when you've installed it globally, you'll have the option to run it with just Polymer. You could just install it locally. You just need to then reference Polymer in your node modules path. So node modules, Polymer CLI, bin, Polymer is probably the path to it. There's a number of commands. Serve is the one that'll just spin up a little web server there, and it manages mapping a few directories for you so that your node modules are actually easily accessible. So that's all that there is for the get setup stage there. Part 3, using Google Maps. So there's a collection of Google Web Components, one of them being the Google Map element. We're going to be using a number of web components here that are around Google Maps. So typically you would go ahead and then install that. Being that the Wi-Fi was unpredictable here, that's why I put it all on your base package.json when you clone the repo. But typically you could just do your npm install /save for any web component that you want to use that is Polymer 3 or the new web component spec compatible. This is just a quick note that when Google originally came up with this code lab here, it was for Polymer 1. Which was using the v0 specs. They haven't updated their components yet for Polymer 3, but I went ahead and did that. So you actually be installing a couple elements under my name as opposed to Google. But it's basically just a couple tweaks so that instead of using HTML imports, it uses ES6 modules. That's all you need to know about that little box there. So getting a key. So again, my API key is tinyurl.com/john-api-key. Right now, Google wants you to basically sign up for billing to actually get a key. So you don't want to deal with that right now, obviously. So let's go ahead and use the element. So to do that, there's a few things we need to do. One, we need to use an ES module import to load our element. Otherwise, when the browser sees a custom element that it doesn't understand, it will just treat it as a span, essentially. So when I load that definition in, declare an instance of the element. So we'll put our Google Map element on the page. And then third, we'll want to style our Google Map so that it has a height, so it actually does appear. Because by default, Google Map will fill the height of its container. In my experience, people forget step 3, and then they're like, nothing is working, so we'll go ahead and do step 3 first, which is adding some styles. So for that, in our style CSS file, I'm just going to add some really basic styles that will go ahead and set the height to 100%. So I'll jump into VS Code here. Here's my styles.css. So this is the default. I'll just select all that, delete that, paste in our new styles, which will do a whole lot of nothing right now, other than change the font. So if I still have this up and running, I didn't even change the font. But that is there. Then we want to add our Google Map element. So in our index.html, that's right here. So standard HTML page, You'll notice here we're loading the web components polyfills. This will not be needed for most browsers, as I mentioned. It's good to load it if you might need it, because this will handle basically loading the polyfills if you need it. Otherwise, it just kind of exits quickly if you don't. That's what the web components-loader.js does. In building for production, you probably would want to have basically a bundle you would serve to browsers that support web components and one that you serve that does not, to load the polyfill or not. And then here we're going to insert our ES6 imports. So to do that, this is what a ES6 import looks like if you haven't done this before. So script type of module. So I will put that right here. So script type of module references the JS file in my node modules directory. If I just command click to that real quick, you'll see this is what it looks like. It's got some other imports there. And again, this is kind of built into the browser now, which is great. It just uses ES6 modules right out of the box. Next, we'll replace the contents of the body tag with an instance of Google Maps. So this is where stuff gets fun. So we've got a Google Map element. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace this. I'm going to go back to my slides here and actually grab our current latitude and longitude. So that's here. API key, I'm going to grab that. So if I save that and the internet is happy with me, then I will get a map. There we go. So there's a map of Vancouver. So this is, I mean, pretty awesome. All I did was drop that on the page and there's Vancouver.
Yeah, and I want to pause there and just emphasize how awesome that is. So a lot of web developers are familiar with React and Vue and Preact and whatever all these other things are, and you're used to writing these tags, which are not exactly custom elements. So this now is being served and the browser is doing all the work. There's no transpiling going on client side that's converting the code. Everything is running right now in the browser. So this Google Map tag is a custom element that's being handled by the browser and showing that map with like one line of code.
Yeah, all.
Thank you. I'm going to walk away. And
The other cool thing, too, is the fact that, it was just a Google Map element with a few attributes. So we added a latitude, we added a longitude. That centered it for us automatically. You'll see here there's a zoom that we set. So that's the zoom level is 13. Also, it's disabled default UI. So basically, with custom elements, if you have the presence of an attribute, then that is basically typically a Boolean property in your JS. So it's set to true if it's there. It would be false if it's not. So it's kind of weird when there's always a falsy thing that makes it true, or a truthy thing that makes it falsy. But for example, if I take away disable default UI and I reload this, it adds this little map satellite thing at the top there. And you've got this little thing at the top right here and the zoom thing there. So that's the default UI. By adding that attribute there, those things disappear. And then also, this is kind of a nice, fun VS Code extension. So if you've got the Polymer extension for VS Code, it will then go ahead and give you the documentation for a web component when you drop that custom element in the page. So I'm hovering over Google Map there, and I can see the documentation right there for how to actually use this. So it tells me what I could do there. You can scroll through it, see different examples of how to do it. And this is all just, again, we saw that in the keynote, how VS Code is pretty sweet. This just works. This is open source. The Polymer team built this little plugin for it. And you can drop in an element, you know exactly how to use it. The API is there in your IDE, which is pretty awesome. Makes life so much easier now. So we've got a map. That was easy. That was awesome. Let's go back to here. I mentioned the disable default UI thing there. It's a Boolean. Next, let's add a marker. So we can add a marker. So there is a Google Map marker element. And that, as you would expect, also takes a latitude and longitude. So I'm going to grab that. Put that inside the Google Map here. We're going to grab the same latitude and longitude values as this, so that'll be centered on where we actually are. And for the title, so now if I reload that, now it dropped a marker right where we are. So here we are with our little marker. Again, dropped an HTML on the page. There's my marker. Piece of cake. Love it. then that just runs it. So one common thing, especially when you're first starting with web components, if you have, I mentioned if you have an element on the page and the browser doesn't know the definition of it, it just treats it as a span tag, which is unfortunate because basically it will just fail silently. So if I were to not include the Google Map.js, so if I delete that right here, and I go back here and I reload it, I have a white screen. I'll be like, something must be wrong. I'll go in my console here. The console, nothing's there. So I'm just like, what is going on? Why is my web component not working? I thought this was amazing. Why is it doing nothing for me? So the Polymer tool provides the Polymer CLI tool provides a linter, which is great for catching stuff like that. So if I were to stop my server here, run Polymer lint and pass it the set of rules in this case, which is Polymer 3, that's what we're using here. If I execute that, that should then yell at me, and it is successfully. It's saying, warning, undefined elements, the element Google Map is not defined, the element Google Map marker is not defined. This has bit me so many times, and the linter has saved me from hours of banging my head, like, why is my component not working? So definitely take advantage of the Polymer linter by all means. I'll get my Polymer server up and running again, and I will add my JS file back so the browser knows what it is, and then I'll get back to my nice map here with the marker on where we are right there. Also, I showed the reference docs for those custom elements within the browser itself. Also, if you go to webcomponents.org, there is documentation for them as well. Might be easier to see it all in one spot there. So you can see the APIs for it. So if I click on, which one of these things is it? I think it's just this overview. There we go. So as you click through, actually, I'll just go to the main part here. If you click through any element here, like Vaadin's a very popular one. Most web components are well documented, and they will actually give you a demo page on webcomponents.org as well, and they'll also give you an access to their API. So we'll be doing that as we come across a few more elements as well. Next, adding driving directions. So again, we've got a map. It'd be useful if you actually get from point A to point B. So to do that, there is a Google Map Directions element. So again, we're going to use an ES6 module to load that onto the page, declare an instance of it, and then connect it to the map. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and grab our directions. Oops. So we've got that import there. And then here's what our directions element looks like. So I'll put that below the map itself. And then for our start address and end address, I'm going to grab, so this is our current location. This is where the after party is on Thursday, so there's a spot that's good to know where to go to. It needs my API key here as well, so I'm going to grab that. There's the key. Then we need to actually go ahead and then map the Google Map to Google Map Directions somehow. So to do that, there is a map property that is exposed by the Google Map element, and that can then be mapped to the map directions thing. So to do that, first I'm just going to write some JavaScript here that's going to go ahead and actually handle the mapping of that. So let me paste that in, and then I'll walk through that very quickly to walk through what that's talking about. So here I'm just grabbing a reference to Google Map and map directions. I then have this by map function that will then take the map property of the Google Map directions and set it equal to the map property of Google Map. And then just because I'm not sure exactly which will fire first, if it exists, I'm going to then call that by map function. If it doesn't, I'll wait for this API load event to fire from Google Maps, and then I'm going to call that function there. So that will then sync up our map directions to the map itself. And if I reload, you'll see there is where we currently are, there is where Telus Garden is, and there is some directions how to get there. Again, pretty sweet. So for this, the title of this is no code. So it's saying we actually go ahead and then get rid of that code, actually do this declaratively in the next couple steps. So any questions so far on what I've kind of walked through there? Cool. OK, here we go. Now we're going to actually go ahead and add some inputs to make this actually something usable that people would want to go ahead and use. So for that, we're going to load a bunch of other custom elements. that I'll just paste in at the top of the page there. Got that set. What we're going to do here is then put in input box for the start address and the end address. So that will be after the directions. So these are some more custom elements. So we have what's known as a paper icon item. So this is basically going to give us a material design look for some inputs. That'll be for a start and end address. And then we can also add some icons to them as well here. So I'm going to grab this iron icon, which is another custom element. And then put in, all this is saying is that, OK, for the set of icons, there are these iron icons. Take the search icon and then put it into the slot, which is item icon. So slots are something that Chris, I think, gets into in his actual building of a component. So this is basically a way to take content in your DOM and insert it into the shadow DOM of a custom element. So we've got that. We're also going to wrap these in a paper card, which is another just material design UI type thing. So I've got paper card here. The elevation 2 just gives it a little additional drop shadow. And then we're going to style our paper card by positioning it in the bottom of the page. That's what we have right here. So I'll just add that to my CSS for the page there. And now if I reload my page, we should see in the bottom right an input. So we have a start address and an address input right here. Right now they're not wired up to do anything, but at least we have that UI drawn on the page again by just dropping in some HTML elements on the page and styling it on our own. Now the nice thing there was we actually were to set some styles by styling the actual custom element itself. So you'll notice here I just referenced paper card and set some styles on that. So you can style the main element itself, but I can't style the shadow DOM of it. But we can at least provide a little bit of styling for the main thing right there. So that's that step. Next step is to go ahead and then bind the search inputs so that you can actually input data into those inputs and have it update the map automatically. To do that, we're going to use data binding. So Polymer has data binding. You've probably seen other frameworks. By default, if you use this double curly bracket syntax there, that's what's known as two-way data binding. So if you update the data in one spot, it will update in the other and vice versa. There's also one-way data binding, which we'll use in a little bit, which is using square brackets, so that if you use one-way data binding, it will just kind of push those there as opposed to, or it'll just receive it as opposed to push it out. This is just an example showing you how you can do data binding at a page without actually having a Polymer element itself. Typically, when you're building Polymer elements, you'll have data binding just happen inside the element itself, but this is how to do it on the main page. We'll skip that right here. So let's talk about how previously I wrote some JS code to actually bind the map property to each other. We can do this by using actually a map property in the properties object itself. So we can use an attribute that is map and then map that property to the other element. So in here, I'm going to first remove the script that we added. So we won't need this. I don't need that body either. So I'm removing the JS. So right now, nothing is talking to each other there. Now I'm going to wrap the body in this DOM bind template. So a DOM bind is another custom element that allows you to actually do binding, data binding within the main body. So this wouldn't happen typically if you're working an individual custom element, but in the main page, then this just allows you to have that functionality. So I'll wrap everything in that. Got my template, got my DOM bind. So that's wrapped up there. And then we're going to go ahead and then map the map property of Google Map to map directions. So I've got a map there and map directions here. So right now, if I reload, if I did everything right, that should still show me my directions. And it did. That's good. We're on the right track. Now I'll actually go ahead and data bind the start and end address inputs to actually make this useful. So for that, as you would expect, we're going to be adding a start and end. So this is what the final code looks like. Let's see if I can walk through it without actually looking at it. So in here, so here's our input. The value is, by default, when I copied it at San Francisco, I'm going to change that to be start. So I'm saying, OK, when data is put into there, there'll be a value that is start. And I want that to be bound to their directions here. So start address here will become start. And I'm going to do the same for end. So end address here, I'll put end. I will copy that. And the end value here, so that was Mountain View in the text. Now it's going to be end. So now if I run the app and give it a shot, so the end address was Telus Garden, and what was our start? Where are we at? 1055 Canada Place. So you'll see now as I actually was typing in there, it automatically was doing that data binding to actually go ahead and update the start location and end location, actually do those directions for me. So this is a way to kind of, you can see, build up a, functionality of Google Maps with just adding a few elements there. The last thing we'll do for this is go ahead and actually give the ability to change the form of travel. So by default, I believe this uses car, where there's other options that Google Maps provides you. So for that, this wants us to grab a couple extra set of icons. So I'll grab these, and also paper tabs, which is just a material design tab and selector. So I've got my element definitions loaded. This is just saying that here you could have iron icon that will allow you to set different icons again. So we're going to leverage those to have driving, walking, biking, and transit. So let's go ahead and do that. So in HTML within our paper card container, we're going to add a paper tabs with the different travel mode options. So I'm going to copy that here. So here's some paper tabs in the paper card. So by default, let's do is grabbing, again, a new element, paper tabs, with a set of paper tab elements that has some text and an icon for each one of those. Next, we're going to go ahead and style that. So this actually is going to show us how to use CSS custom properties. This is also supported in most modern browsers. But for ones that don't support it, Polymer provides this custom style, custom element that allows you to basically use the abilities of custom properties for browsers that don't support that natively. So here in the head, I'm going to grab this code here, and we'll walk through that real quick. So below my existing CSS, I'm going to paste in this code here. So this is some custom styles. So this is saying, all right, paper tabs, set the margin top to 16. But here's what CSS custom properties look like. So they start with a double dash in the front, and then it has this property here, and that's going to set a value. So this is going to say, set the selection bar color equal to this blue here. And for paper tabs, set this ink property to that there. So it's, how do we actually know that these exist? This is where the documentation comes into play. So if I were to go to paper tabs and search for that, so if you look at the documentation on webcomponents.org for that, they have the styling properties there. So here we can see different custom properties that will allow you to, when you set those properties, it will go ahead and pierce the shadow DOM and then actually set properties inside the shadow DOM itself. So this is a way for us as users of these web components to go ahead and select customizations based on what the author has decided are allowed to be customized. All right, so I've got those styles in here. Let's see what else. So if I were to load that up right now, you'll see in the bottom right, we've now got our different modes of transportation there with the custom styles that we applied to them. But the last thing I want to do is actually go ahead and actually have it so that when you select different modes of transportation, how does it actually go ahead and update the map itself. So to do that, there's a travel mode property on Google Map Directions. And we want to basically bind that to the selected paper tab. So to do that, we're going to do a few things here. First, we're going to leverage that travel mode, and we're going to use one-way data binding here because we just need to receive it in this case. So I'm going to go back to Google Map Directions. It's right here. I'm going to say travel mode is equal to travel mode, and then I want to actually go ahead and then get that value pushed into travel mode somehow. So to do that, within paper tabs, I'm going to just copy and paste this and then walk through the couple updates that this made. So in our paper tabs, we have selected, and that's going to be sending out the travel mode as that value out to anything that's listening to it. And then we have attribute for selected equal to label. So what this is saying is that for each paper tab, we've added a label attribute, and that has a value. So this is saying for paper tabs, it's saying, OK, look at that label attribute. In this case, it's driving. And then whatever is selected, beacon that out as the travel mode. And then that is then going to be consumed by Google Map Directions as the travel mode here. So it's mapping the travel mode you selected from paper tabs to Google Map Directions, then it will then map one to the other. And then you see we also have walking, bicycling, and transit options there. So that's what we talk about for this. Assuming I did that right, let's try this again. So I'll do Telus Garden, and what was our address? 1055 Canada Place. So by default, nothing is selected. If I switch to, let's try bicycling, you'll see it gives us the bike path, which is different in that case. Go to transit to find the transit way there. It gives us transit information. Walking and driving adjusted slightly. So again, this is kind of shows you the power for how you can just, with a few lines, really a few lines of code, take an existing piece of complex functionality, which is Google Maps, and then just make it work for you. I've actually used this myself at Comcast a few times. We've had some projects where we want to have a map in it, and this just maybe drop it in there. In less than an hour, I was able to get stuff up and running. Any questions about that before we get into building actually custom elements from scratch with Chris?
Yeah, so I just want to emphasize again is like that was really cool because it's just showing us the power of these custom elements that you can just drop stuff on the page, not have to write any JavaScript code, and stuff like magically works. Like you can just create this Google Maps really quickly. And so in the second portion, when I take over, I'm going to show over how to build a custom element and what's happening under the hood to make this stuff happen, which should be cool because I like talking about it.
All right.
Any questions? Because we're going to go deep diving into the specs now. Question?
Are these web components really accessible?
Yes, they are. Especially the Google Map ones because they spend a lot of time doing accessibility. So these are just like any other DOM nodes that you add to the page. You have to make them accessible. So you still have to add your ARIA tags, A11 tags, and do everything the right way.
Yeah, there's some, like I mentioned, the iron elements. There's a few accessibility specific ones that will help like announce things and that kind of thing. There's also a set of open source elements called Elix elements. So if you go to elix.org, that's elix.org, they really focus on accessible elements. And those aren't Polymer ones. They're just plain vanilla web components like Chris is going to show us how to do there. So that's stuff that I recommend. Some of the paper ones, like the paper tabs there, aren't as accessible as other ones. But yeah, the Elix ones are kind of like the gold standard, and they actually follow what they've laid out as the gold standard for web components, which includes accessibility in that case. Any other questions around what we saw right here? All right, cool.
Do you have mic?
Yeah, we can switch mics there. Now for Chris's, if you just cloned his repo, you can follow along or just watch him there and definitely ask questions around this.
tinyurl.com/Comcast-toast. Or it's also in the links that John sent out earlier. It's in the gist. But no, I'm going to sit, if that's okay. Anybody object to that? Okay, cool. Nobody objected. Duly noted, no objections in the room. So I'm gonna show a toast. For those who don't know what a toast is, it's not bread that you put butter on or jam on, whatever Canadians do with their toast. So this is a web toast, which is this little thing that pops up on the bottom. I have 2 on the screen, and then it automatically closed after a set duration. So we're gonna walk through the steps of building this as a custom element. And right now, this is the completed one. And what this looks like here is I have WC toast. So here's my custom element that I wrote. I have a duration attribute that I set to 5 seconds, and the other one I set to 3 seconds, and that's why one closed after 3 seconds, one closed after 5 seconds. And you can put nice messages in there like right side toast or I'm on the left. And you can style them differently. So I had one style to go on the right, just saying right pixels, and then left. And again, so just showing that one more time, and then we're going to start building it step by step. Cool. So check out step 1. So we're going to start with what is a custom element and what does a custom element look like. And this is the hello world of custom elements. So we're going to create a toast, and we're just going to put hello world in this blue box down here. And so custom elements have lifecycle hooks, just like if you're familiar with React. So we have a constructor, we have connected callback, we have disconnected, we have attribute changed callback. So these are lifecycle hooks that happen when the element is added to the DOM, when it's removed from the DOM, and when an attribute changes on it. Kind of clear naming conventions, so that's pretty good. And so in order to make this say hello world, you can say this dot inner HTML equals hello world. And if you do this in the constructor, it will fail. And I always like to emphasize this because, and you go into the console here, the console will actually say, this is a fun message. This is one of the best messages in web development, which is failed to construct custom element. The result must not have children. This is kind of a shame that they're not allowed to have children, because I have children, and they're a great joy in my life. So the reason for that is because you can actually say document.createElement in the command line, or in JavaScript, and say document.createElement WC toast. And since that's created in memory, you don't want it to create children right away. So you want to create children once it's attached to the DOM. So if we simply move this down into the connected callback and save it, we now get our hello world message to show up down here in the bottom. That is essentially a custom element. Oh, one more part. So there's this window.customelements.define WC toast with our class. So custom elements are a class definition. So I created my class WC toast. It extends HTML element, which is part of your browser. And we're just telling the browser that whenever you see the WC toast tag, execute this class definition. So the browser literally is parsing the DOM. It's seeing this WC toast, and it's saying, cool, I'm going to run your constructor, and then I'm going to run the connected callback, which is just putting inner HTML into this. And this is my WC toast tag. Full stop. All right, let's go to step 2. And this is probably something that most web developers can relate to, is someone in your team, it's obviously not you, but they added a global style that made everything red. And you're like, why would you change the body tag to color red? Like, that is just, no, don't do that. Or they use a wildcard selector and make fun stuff. And this is where Shadow DOM comes in. This is the most powerful and most complicated new spec out there. And we're going to solve this color red bleeding through by creating a shadow root. So here we can say this dot root equals this dot attach shadow. And this requires an object of mode open. We're going to talk about what mode open and close means in the next section. But here I'm just creating a shadow root, and I'm saving the shadow root as a local variable, as this dot root. And then I'm going to say this, if I can type, dot inner HTML. Oh, don't do that. This dot root dot inner HTML equals
No children, Chris.
hello world. And the cool part is this can be done in the constructor because the browser will add the shadow root after it's inserted in the DOM. So it does that for you automatically. And so now we should have the same thing down here, which is hello world. And we created this shadow root, and the shadow root is supposed to stop these CSS conflicts. But for some reason, my custom element down here is still red. And it's like, well, why are you still red? I thought you would stop CSS from coming into my element. And that is not what the shadow DOM does. The shadow DOM allows cascading styles to still go into your custom elements.
Okay? If they're inheritable.
Yeah, this is like Hotel California. You can check in, but you can't check out. That's what I like to say. That's my little pun joke there. So essentially, your styles will still go down into the shadow root, but you can actually override them. So here, I'm just going to put a style tag into my shadow DOM, and I'm going to say host. I want my color to be blue, because I like blue. It's a nice calming color for me. And now I will go over here, I will reload, and now my custom element is blue, and it's not red. But you have something to say?
I'll say that host there, you might not have seen that before. So basically, that colon host selector means the current element that has a shadow DOM. That's basically what that references in that case.
Which would be WC Toast there.
Yep.
And I can actually wrap my hello world in a p tag. And I definitely want to close that p tag. And now I can say, all my p tags in my shadow DOM, I want to be color blue. And the cool part about this is, OK, hello world is color blue still, but nothing outside of the shadow DOM is color blue. Even though this p tag on the page should be color blue. Like what we normally would expect is if somebody put a style tag in there with this global selector of p and made everything blue, like it would affect everything else on the page. With the shadow DOM, you can create custom elements, style it however you want, and it won't affect any other things on the page. That is the beauty of shadow DOM. What happens in the shadow DOM stays in the shadow DOM. I could just go all day with jokes on shadow DOM.
No BEM syntax, no nothing, just beautiful p tags all day long.
Yeah, and I think it's great because if you create many small little custom elements, you don't have to worry about using BEM syntax and adding class tags to everything. You can just override the p tag. You can override an h1 tag because it's only going to affect your custom element. I'm going to pause dramatically. Everybody's with me so far, right? OK. What else do I have to cover in the shadow DOM? So there's also slot, which is, let's say we don't want to say hello world anymore. We want to be able to take input. We want to be able to take a child. So here I can go into my WC Toast and I can say, hi, John. And I can put John in. And John is a child element now of WC Toast. And whatever somebody else puts in, they can put it into the slot element. So this will actually take that John and change it so now it says hello, John. And we're going to talk more about slot in the next upcoming slides. Cool. And yeah. So the way to penetrate shadow DOM and actually be able to affect things inside of the shadow DOM is to use custom properties. And John kind of pointed out what custom properties were before. So here I actually set WC Toast, and I said, I'm going to create a variable called WC Toast color. And I set that to blue. And here what I can do is I can say var WC Toast color. And I can default it to, let's go with green, because green's another pretty color. And so now it's going to stay blue because somebody's setting that variable. And if I remove this variable up here, it should go to green, which, yeah, the projector shows pretty well. So this allows you to set up theming ability so that anybody can use your custom element and change styles in there. But you can also set defaults. Questions, comments, concerns? This is a very interactive section. So if you have questions, just shout them out. And I'll pause and answer.
Got a question over there.
Mm-hmm. So again, here's my p tag receiving the variable for WC Toast color, or using that variable. Right now, it's not defined at the top level. So this is my index page over here. And if I just put that back in, saying, hey, I want my WC Toast to be color blue, it passes down into my custom element. Cool. All right. It's time for step 2A. Because you usually create initial steps, and then you want to go into more detail about stuff, and then you create A and B. So now we want to talk about open and closed. So that's that first parameter that I pass into attach shadow. And this is really, I wish they wouldn't have even created this. So there's a mode open and closed. And it's, all that means is if you actually select this with the developer tools, you'll see this shadow root closed property here. And if I actually select WC Toast, and I say boo, 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 escape $0.shadow root.
$0 is the selected element, if you're not familiar with that in Chrome DevTools, by the way.
Yes, so that's my WC Toast, and I'm trying to say, give me your shadow root, and it's returning null. And that's all that mode close does, is it means that you can't actually access the shadow root. And if I just change that back to open, and save, and reload, Now I can actually click on my WC Toast and say shadow root, and it's actually the document fragment. So I can actually manipulate and change the shadow DOM elements inside of there.
Not that you'd want to, but if you really wanted to and dig into one that you were using, that's how you could actually reference the shadow root itself.
Yeah, so you should basically always leave the mode to open. And the other thing is, setting the mode to close doesn't actually close it. So since I'm saving a reference to it in this.root, I still have access to the shadow DOM even if I close it off. So it's kind of like just don't do it. Just don't do it.
It's a false sense of security.
False sense of security. The other cool part is query selector. So inside of my toast element, I added this p tag, and I gave it an ID, hello toast. And so if I go back to the browser here, and I just say document.querySelector, hello toast, and I try looking for this, it's going to return null, because that hello toast exists inside of my custom element inside of the shadow DOM. So you no longer have this global find everything with query selector. What you have to do is you actually have to go into the shadow root of the WC Toast, or into the WC Toast element, and do $0.root.querySelector, hello toast. So now I basically have access to my own shadow DOM. My custom element can basically reference its own container. So this is a really great way to package up these powerful components like Google Map and give it to someone else and not have to worry about them messing with your stuff internally. Make sense? Cool. All right, what else do I have to emphasize here? Styling based on context. So this is another cool pseudo selector, is this host context. And what this says is I can style my component differently depending on what styles my parent tags have. So this is going to say WC Toast is going to look for a parent with a dark class. And here in the body tag, I just created a body.dark, which just sets the background to black. And so if I change my body tag to dark, I can actually apply different styles on my custom element. So it's actually just going to change the entire look of my page. So that this is like more theming that you can do with your custom elements. Is there any questions? Still good? All right, let's go on to 2B. Not that one, we don't need that. So now we're going to talk about slotted elements. So this is again bringing children into the WC Toast. So here I just added an h2 tag, a span tag, and another child of the span tag. And so what this looks like is here, Chris Lorenzo. That's me. And so the h2 tag here is a slotted element of my WC Toast. And I actually have the ability to style the children that come into my custom element, into my shadow DOM. And I can set margin and font size and colors and whatever I want. The thing to note is here I have the title tag. And you have the ability to style the title tag. But if someone on the page styles the title tag like they did here, those take precedence over what the custom element is styling it, or your shadow DOM is styling it. So here the color is set to white and the background is black. And you'll actually notice that it's white color text with the background of black, even though my custom element is trying to set the color to orange. But you'll also notice that I set border top to 2 pixels solid green, and that is being applied. Oh, I didn't mean to start up Slack. So the two are kind of merged together. And if I remove that title tag from here, it will just use the styles that I have for my custom element. So this is really going over the specificity of CSS. That's just a fun way of saying that. The next cool part about slotted elements is we have this company tag, and it is a child of a child to my component. So it's actually a child of this title tag. You cannot style that in your shadow DOM. You have no access to it. You can only style top-level children in your component. So only your first children. You can't affect your grandchildren. That's another joke, another shadow DOM joke. I am like 3 for 3. They're pretty funny. So here, for instance, I have my company, and I actually have it set to be color green and be a block element. And right now, that's not happening. This should be green and a block element, which is not doing. And as soon as I take this span tag and make it a top-level element, so a first child of my component, now those styles will actually take effect. And it became green, and it's a block-level element. Any questions? This is just like cool little things that you need to know when you work with Shadow DOM. And you might not need to know, but there's a lot of power to it. The other is that you can do name slots. So right now, I'm just using the slot tag, which is saying, hey, any children that are given to me, just throw them here in this slot element. But what I can also do is I can give them names, and I can say, give me just the title. And here I would say span slot equals title. And now it's going to match those two up. And it's only going to pull in the title. So it's only going to take that one child that it's asking for. And the other part is you can do this multiple times. So I can have multiple things on here. I could say that this is slot equals title 2. So anything with a slot title on there will be grabbed and pulled into that one slot. And then you still have the ability to do the default slot and say, hey, everything else that they put in there, just kind of throw down here. And you can change the order of that, which I really want to emphasize. So here, I can now have company on top and then put the title stuff after it. So that really gives you the benefit of like kind of passing in objects to your functions. The order doesn't matter anymore. So folks can put different tags in there, just put the name on it, and then you can reorder it in your custom element. And that's kind of the power of Shadow DOM. All right. So now we're going to continue on and make our toast work.
One thing I'll mention real quick while Chris changes there. As far as the slotted CSS you can set, typically because you can only go one level deep, I found that the only time I want to do that is if I know that I'm building a custom element that's going to typically use a specific type of child. So going back to that Google Map example, we had paper tabs that was always going to have a paper tab child. So that's the time when it kind of makes sense to use slotted as one of your CSS selectors. Other than that, typically if someone is putting content into your custom element itself in the main DOM, then they should have the ability to style that, and they can. And as you see, the specificity will override it anyway in the main document. So it really just makes sense if you have like something you want to build that are kind of two elements that work together, one as a child of the other.
Mm-hmm. OK, so for step 3, what I did was just took some styles to make our toast actually work and look nice, which basically, if you add an open class to WC toast, it will move the element up and transform it to go up. And then if you add the class close, it'll go down and fade away. And that's really all that's happening here. And so now what we're going to do is we're actually going to make the toast open, and we're going to make it close. And the great part about custom elements, again, is this is just a class. So if you're familiar with classes already, I can just create a function called open. And you don't actually use the function word with classes, because that's extra typing. So this dot class list equals open. And I want to create a close method, which just changes the class to close. Boom. And now if I go over here, so I'm going to select my WC toast element. I'm going to call that method by referencing it with $0.open. And boom, it just changed that class. It added the class open to the tag, which then applied new CSS styles and made it come up. And now I can do the same thing, and I can call that close method. And that will change the class to close if I hit enter there. So it changed the class to close, made my toast go down. This is pretty straightforward stuff to make a custom element and kind of write code. And a lot of this is just native browser APIs that I'm using right now. ClassList is a native browser API that exists on all the browsers. I think IE11 even supports it. So you can just take advantage of it. What was my next part here? Yes. The other thing is I added a div close with a little x in there. So if we go back here and we open this back up again, I'm going to make it so that if you click on this x, it will call the close function, make it close out. And so right down in my constructor, I can just say this.root.querySelector, and I can get the .close div. And again, the great part is I don't have to namespace this. I don't have to do BEM syntax, because the query selector is only going to find it in my Shadow DOM element. So it's going to select close, and then I want to add an event listener for click event. And when you click on it, we'll get an event, and we just want to say this dot close. Boom. Awesome. So now I have my toast. I reloaded. I'm going to open this thing up. I'm going to click on the X, and it goes away. It calls the close method. And so I really want to emphasize, we showed like the Google Maps things first, and there's like a lot of power in these custom element tags, but there's a lot of JavaScript happening behind the scenes to make them work. And so it's really great if you have developers who are building these really complicated, really powerful custom elements, and then other engineers can just pull that in, and it just works. And that's really the benefit of these, and it works regardless of whether you're using Angular, Vue, React. That doesn't matter. All right, so let's continue on here. We're on the next step. So we have our open and close, and now we're going to go through and we're going to add a duration so that the toast automatically closes. And in order to add the duration, so the duration is an attribute. I want to go here, and I want to say duration equals 3 seconds. Drag this back over here. And again, part of the custom element definition is you get this static get observed attributes. And this tells the browser to look for specific attributes for when they change. So I'm going to add duration into here. And so now whenever the value of duration changes on my custom element, it's going to call this attribute change callback. And this is, again, part of the spec. And it will pass in the name, which will be duration in this case. And if the duration changes, I want to set a local variable or a variable on my class, duration, equal to the value that comes in. And you'll get the new value, and you also get the previous value. And this is the browser is doing this for you. So there's no framework. This is just happening automatically by the browser. And then when my custom element opens, I'm just going to say if this dot duration is set, or there's some duration. Don't mind my styling. I just want to call set timeout. Timeout. And I want to call this dot close. I'm going to bind it to this. And I'm going to call it in this dot duration times 1,000. And so now, when we open the toast, hopefully, if everything's right, should automatically disappear. And that's kind of the power of these durations or attributes. You can set up whatever attribute you want. And this basically allows developers to pass in values to you. And they are typically strings. And they do not do data binding. So this is where you could probably all walk out and be like, boo, oh, this doesn't do data binding. And thank you all for coming. Yes. So by default, custom elements does not do data binding. And what that means is you actually have to change the value. You have to call this dot attribute. Is it this dot set attribute? This dot set attribute.
Set attribute, yeah.
So let's actually show what I mean here. So right now, I have wctoast.duration here. And I can say $0.set attribute duration. And I can set it to a different value. Oh, come back up. So now I'm going to set it to 5. And actually, I could probably go through the source real quick. So I really like debugging things. So every time an attribute changes, it's going to call this attribute change callback handler. So if I go back into here and I just say set attribute to 10, it's going to actually pause here, and I can actually say, OK, the value coming in is duration. The old value was 5. The new value is 10. And I'm just going to update the value here. And so now when I open the toast, it's just going to use the new value. And that's not necessarily data binding. What we really want is we want to have an object and be able to like say, hey, whenever this object changes, just automatically update this other thing. So if you want to do that, you should use a library. So there's libraries that we can do. So I spent time to rewrite this with LitElement. And that will be our next step. Are there any questions so far on custom elements or anything? So there are different methods for actually interacting with slotted elements. So if you call this.querySelector or this.root.querySelector, it doesn't actually query selector your slotted elements. And there's other native methods that I didn't even go into for accessing your slotted elements. But yeah, great question. So what I recommend is this is showing you how to write vanilla custom elements. But in today's world, you probably should never write vanilla stuff because there's so many good micro libraries and functions to do things that you should build on top of those. This is why you use Lodash regularly, because those functions are small and simple and you just don't want to reinvent the wheel. So in the same regard, custom elements have base classes. So here I'm using LitElement, which is produced by the Polymer team, which adds in data binding to our custom elements. And LitElement is a base class that is about 5 kilobytes in size. So it's really small and really fast. And so here I'm using the import statement to import LitElement. One thing to note that is if you are using JS modules, which I didn't actually show here, and I can't make this bigger, but I'm actually, the whole time I was loading and working in that index file from just my file system. So all that custom element stuff was happening without any server, just the HTML file and the browser doing the magic. If you use JS modules, you actually have to use a local server to make it work, which I can do, Polymer serve here? So I have to pull up an HTTP server for this lit HTML one to work.
That's because it wants localhost instead of just file for the path to it, because there's some security things set in place.
Yeah, I thought JS modules would be really awesome, but they're not really awesome. They're pretty awesome.
They're awesome if you have the key to them.
Yeah, they could be more awesome. So here I built the same thing using the lit HTML. And the lit HTML gives you a lot of additional benefits, which is you can create multiple properties on there. You don't have to have your attribute change callback. So it kind of abstracts a lot of the underlying syntax of custom elements and gives you a cleaner, simpler kind of interface. And they also have a render method, which will be called whenever your values actually change. And this is using template literals, which are a really, really fast way to update DOM. And here I can just set, I can data bind this.binOpened. Bin opened. Who came up with that name? I think I came up with that name. I threw that together really quick. I don't think calling bin opened is a good way of doing it.
Hardest things in computer science.
Naming things. And also, rather than using like add event listener for doing click binding, LitElement has just used at syntax. And so when I click on this div, it will call this.close, which is my same method that I have down here. And here I'm just setting this.isOpen to true or false. And it's doing the data binding for that. So I set isOpen as a property up here. And it's going to reflect it to WC Toast. So what this looks like, it looks basically identical. So here's my WC Toast. I have a method that I can say open. And I'm just changing the, actually I can say is open. And I can set that to false. And I can set that to true. Oh, not open, to true. And so I set it to true. It automatically reflected and added the class isOpen to my element, which applies the CSS styles. And then I can change it to false. And so this is kind of the data binding in effect. The other thing that I just show here is I can change the name, which right now, where did I set the name? Name, boom, boom, boom. Oh, yeah, so name is a property in my index file. So here I have name is Billy, because again, naming things is hard. I can say name is JS Interactive. And essentially, when my toast opens, it says it now has the JS Interactive value. And I can just say here, I can say $name equals fofo banana. So this is some of my typing history. Fofo banana is just a fun thing to say every now and then. Why did that not data bind? That should be reflected right now. Oh, I'm not actually clicked on WC Toast, am I? Or I'm clicked on, yeah, I got to click on this one. Yeah. And now I can say fofo banana.
There you go.
And so I changed the value on my console, and it instantly reflected in the DOM. And I think that's a lot of what you want, is you want this data binding. And you can get it with custom elements with a 5 kilobyte base class. And it gives you a lot nicer syntax to write custom elements. So are there any questions? That about concludes building custom elements from scratch and seeing what's happening under the hood. We're gonna wrap it up with, we have a few more slides? Yeah, and we go over why you'd want to use these versus using frameworks today, et cetera. So,
Yeah, right here.
What are your production problems with browser support?
he just jumps right into the hard stuff. He's like,
That's a legit question. So the biggest problem we have is IE11, just because it's got to chew on all that JavaScript to load that polyfill. For the ones that support it natively, it's great. It's super fast.
They support it consistently? There's not like the browser specific, like Safari specific custom elements?
yeah, so let me actually jump into that. So this is my.xfinity.com. This gets about 1 million unique visitors a day. And at the top here, this thing up the top is a custom element that is being served to everyone.
And it's vanilla. It doesn't use lit or
Just
anything
vanilla,
else.
because I really like vanilla, maybe with a few jimmies or sprinkles on top.
Jimmy's is a Jersey, Philly thing. No one
Yeah,
knows what we're
I don't
talking
know
about.
if Canadians know jimmies, but it's like the sprinkles, the red colored things. But here's my XC-header, and that's a custom element tag in production that we're serving out to millions of customers.
And then for that, the way that works is basically the way that we load that element is we've got JS that does feature detection for custom elements, and then we then load the appropriate JS for it. If the browser supports it, we load one that does not include the polyfills. If it needs the polyfills, it will then load that one.
Yeah, so let's actually see if this site has implemented that code, which this is a little bit more complicated. The other great part about web components is you actually can put stuff into the page, and it works much better than an iframe. Like iframes have all kinds of security problems, so you can't talk to the custom element components. But here, we can actually include a custom element component, and that page can write all kinds of JavaScript to pass messages back and forth without having to go through an iframe. So they can actually set up what the greeting is, which is like what name should we display, is the user signed in or out. You can do all kinds of amazing things with it. And you can also style it. But loading it in is we basically were just checking if custom elements is defined. So yeah, here's loading the script tag is if window.customelements is in the browser, get the web component version. Otherwise, get the ES5 version, which is IE11 and Edge, until Edge implements it. But after Firefox 63 releases, it should be about 70% of traffic will have custom elements built in.
And again, nearly 100% of mobile, because both mobile browsers support it now.
Yeah. And since this is a vanilla custom element, we're not actually using shadow DOM. The polyfill for custom elements is about 2 kilobytes. So it's really, really small.
Yeah,
So there's
the polyfill
no
for
overhead.
Shadow DOM is actually called Shady DOM because it doesn't fully implement Shadow DOM.
Yeah. And that's about
see.
20 kilobytes in size.
Yeah, so what we've done, at least for this element, because we use it across the board at Comcast on lots of sites, is actually, it does actually use BEM syntax. But then once all the browsers support it, and then we can drop other ones, then we'll switch it to be Shadow DOM.
Are there performance or test gotchas or tips?
Do you
Use them?
want me to answer that?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? I would say the pretty much got
Actually, that was a great segue. Tomorrow, I'll be giving a talk about performance optimizations for progressive web apps. So definitely come to my talk if you want to talk about performance. The great part about this, and I talk about this a little bit tomorrow, is the reason for web components is really to reduce the size of JavaScript that we're sending down to browsers. So if you look across all the frameworks that exist today, they are all doing some kind of component-based. Like React, you just capitalize the name of the components. Vue.js does it. Angular does it. You're building components. And what we showed you today is we are building components with no framework. So you're not sending down that additional 35 kilobyte overhead for React and React DOM. They're running this in the browser with like no polyfills, no overhead, so it runs a lot faster. Like it will start up a lot faster than a lot of your frameworks will.
Yeah. I also mentioned, so like the sites we've built entirely out of Polymer and web components, for them, we'll do kind of your typical performance optimizations. Like, so we'll load the initial bundle you need just to render that page, then we will lazy load in the element definitions for other elements. So that way, the browser isn't processing all the stuff it doesn't need to.
More questions?
What about custom DOM events?
Just like firing your own event type thing?
Yeah,
And syntactic sugar for listening to.
Ooh.
Go for it, Chris.
So this is like going into the JavaScript framework, right? Like every framework that you're using, they have a different syntax or a different way of handling it. The web browsers all use like add event listener, and then you say click or whatever your event is. With custom elements, you're just using standard browser APIs. What I showed with LitElement is they give you some sugar for it, so that here I basically get an @click handler that I'm adding to the element, and it's going to do that add event listener thing for me automatically.
That's within your template. What about when someone uses it?
Yes, so how Polymer does it is they fire events. So you could add an event in here, and I could say this.fire event, which is it's fire event or something
Fire's
like that.
like the
And then you
Polymer
can still
sugar
add
around
event
add event
listener.
listener and like dispatch event. So the Polymer has a fire method in it that does that. And it has a listen method, so it's basically sugar for the normal browser events. But as a consumer of a web component, basically, hopefully the producer of it would say, like, here's the events it's going to fire out. And then you would then listen for those events. So like, for example, when we use stuff with like Redux and that kind of thing, we'll basically have our custom elements fire up certain events that then we've got a Redux listing for those events that can act on those events. Does that answer your question, or you still have more thoughts there?
I was wondering if there's anything such as @click that could be used.
Outside of it?
No. You'd have to kind of build it inside of the framework, or everyone would have to be using lit, and then they would have access to it. But essentially, like if you're keeping it vanilla, you would have to do this.add event listener, and then whatever the name of my custom event is that I created, and listen for that, and then do something off of it. Yeah, you can't create like a standard for events because each framework does it differently. You basically have to do it the way the browser has it, which is add event listener.
So in the browser, you could do like on-click type code.
Yes, and I don't think custom elements does that yet, or that's not part of the definition to say like, on this event, run this function.
Although it extends HTML elements, I'm kind of curious now. So if that's built into HTML element, it might actually work. I never tried it.
Maybe. We
That's
have a
fun
takeaway.
one. We'll have to try that one.
We'll let you know. Other questions? Yeah.
What about server-side rendering web components?
So that is a great question, which I talk about server-side rendering a little bit in my talk tomorrow. So yeah, this is a good segue for my talk tomorrow. You should come to that. But server-side rendering, so web components do not really work with server-side rendering because they're all basically JavaScript. There is server-side rendering with like Skate.js, which does web components. Yeah, I'm kind of like.
Yeah, so basically, you'll have the same types of things you will with web components as you would with any other framework. So like you'll need to basically hydrate those elements, like basically you can load it in, but it's not gonna, the browser won't do anything until it loads that definition for it. So the server-side rendering piece is kind of tricky in that respect. There's ways to do it. There's some videos online I've seen, but we abandoned the SSR thing. We tried it out at work, then decided it wasn't gonna actually give us a boost, but.
Yeah, and even with server-side rendering, like the whole goal is to make the page interactive as quickly as possible. So you still want the JavaScript to run, which is why you don't necessarily have to server-side render web components.
What you could do is basically, since when you SSR or server-side render, you could have basic elements in there, and then since the definition for element won't be loaded yet, you can have some styling on the page to basically provide some styles for that. So basically, if you have like a custom element that's just like my-element, and you put in some markup inside of that, until the browser loads that my element definition, it'll just render stuff inside there as if my element was a span. So you can put CSS in your page and basically have that render the way you want it to render, but then the functionality will come in until it actually loads in that element definition. So once the browser loads the JS for that element, then it will then provide the interactivity that you're looking for in that case.
Yeah, I think that's really cool to show, which is I'm just going to remove the definition for WC Toast. And if I go back over to here and just reload, like right now my toast is kind of on here as a span tag, and it's not hidden or anything. Like the browser doesn't know what WC Toast is, so it just like sits there.
So we could set some default styles for WC Toast and the content inside of it before it gets upgraded, and then once it upgrades it, it will then update that to be valid.
And that's like a really powerful method for lazy loading in like additional pages, because you can create many hundreds of different custom element tags on the page and only load in the ones that are needed for the overview page, and then lazy load additional custom elements to bring up additional pages.
That's actually how we render that that header on the top of some of our pages. So basically, because we need to load in that definition for what we have is known as our XC header element, we'll put markup in there that will have, I think, like a sign-in
XC
link
header.
by default. And then when the element's upgraded, then it provides in those other links you see there. Like you see, like there's links to like email and different websites there. All just taking advantage of the fact that we can display some content before the element gets upgraded. When I say upgrade, I mean when the actual definition is loaded by the browser and processed. So something is rendered immediately, and then it can, quickly thereafter load that.
And I think there's more important things. So we work at Comcast, which is a Fortune 50 company, and we have dozens and dozens of teams building all kinds of different stuff. And we build stuff in Angular, we have stuff in Vue, we have stuff in React. Basically everything that exists, we have it. And the point being, like, if you are a small shop and you have one team and everyone's doing it in React, like that is great. You don't really need custom elements or web components because you can just do everything in React. And you don't have to worry about this fragmented space where every developer team is doing something differently. If you want to share code between one team and another, like that Polaris toolbar that I was showing.
Yeah, the XE header. It's called Polaris internally. So
yeah, we call it
most
Polaris
definitely,
internally, but that is a custom element that exists across many different properties that Comcast has built. And all those different properties, this is Ruby on Rails, so it's just pure vanilla. It goes on my account, which is Angular 1.5. It goes on these Polymer sites that we've also built. It also loads on Angular. Like, it loads on all the different frameworks. And that's kind of the benefit of why this was written as a custom element. But if you're a small shop, you probably don't need custom elements. You could just, everyone's going to use Vue.js, or everyone's going to use React, and you can share components that way. And there are benefits to using React because then you don't have to worry about IE11 and compatibility with different things, because React kind of works across all current browsers today. This custom elements is really important going forward, maybe 2 or 3 years from now when IE11 is like deprecated and gone. Everyone gets to have custom elements for free.
Let's say like we have already implemented something in React, something, say some kind of a grid component. Put that into something like component and give it to others like public thing. Is there any?
Yeah. So let me gather my thoughts. Web components are great for sharing between different frameworks. There's actually a website called Custom Elements Everywhere, and it talks about some of the gotchas for creating a custom element and sharing it with React and Angular and Vue. There's a lot of work happening with frameworks to export to custom elements. So Angular has Angular elements. The Vue.js CLI also exports. The problem with those elements currently is if you create a Vue.js element and export it as a custom element, and anybody else like loads that in, it's still loading the entire Vue.js library, which is like 20 kilobytes. And the same thing with Angular right now. Angular is working on their Ivy renderer, which is about 2 kilobytes, and then they're actually going to be able to export a custom element for about 2 kilobytes, like their Hello World one. And so my advice is you're probably not going to start writing custom elements by yourself anytime soon. You are still going to continue to use frameworks, and the frameworks behind the scenes are going to migrate to using these new APIs. So they'll take advantage of custom elements when the browser supports it, because additionally, like, these new APIs exist in the browser, and they're going to run a lot faster than the frameworks will be able to do it with JavaScript, because it's native code. It's another cool part.
You guys had performance problems on like CPU-intensive web components, where you might like have you tried using like web workers or something to offload to Canvas?
Yeah, so we've run into some
Come
issues
to my
that,
talk tomorrow?
yeah, Chris will have that as well. So for example, like we have an HTML browser for our set-top boxes, which is like very low power. It's like a same as like a poor phone. And there, some of the issues we ran into have not been web components themselves, but kind of like the rendering that happens based on that. So we've basically done some optimization to make sure that we're only painting when we have to paint. That's been the biggest thing I've kind of run into as far as, and that's not necessarily web component specific, but just something I've run into having used Polymer and web components for a few years now. It's really looking at like in Chrome developer tools, like you look at like optimizing when is something being painted and then having that be minimal. So we might, again, delay element definition. We might make sure that we do all this processing in a worker and then do the paint after that. So that's certainly something we've done as we do any normal performance analysis, which Chris may get into tomorrow, as he's mentioned as well during his talk.
Yeah, I think custom elements don't necessarily solve all performance. Like if you do bad things or write poor code as a custom element, it's still going to be slow. I think the benefit is, though, like you can write a custom element and share it with other people, and if it's open source, like everybody's contributing to make it a really good custom element, like my WC Toast. Don't use my WC Toast. There's like other ones that are available already that are fully accessible, really well performant and everything that you should be using, and it's open source, and if you find a performance issue, you can contribute back to it and make it even faster and better. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Going once.
There we go, back there.
Yo.
I've heard that custom elements can be non-SEO friendly because they're not like human readable or divs or standard kind of HTML elements. Is there an answer for that or ways to make your site more accessible than that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Custom elements exist basically in JavaScript. So they actually, the browser has to download it and then run the JavaScript to make it work. Google handles SEO on custom elements completely fine, which is really the only search engine that you kind of need to care about, to be honest. But Bing, most of the search engines actually execute the JavaScript in the page too before actually doing SEO. And you can still put markup in the page that doesn't exist inside of the web component. And the web components are still created like span tags. So if you put markup inside of your web component, the SEO will still read that.
Also related, if you're familiar with the AMP project by Google, that's actually using custom elements itself. So they will convert your page to use custom elements when you load up a Google AMP page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and YouTube is using custom elements as well. And they get like 1 billion people or something a day.
Yep.
So in your situation where you have a bunch of parts of Comcast teams using that same element, do you guys have any tips about what actually works in sharing components? Like maybe not make a super deep tree of components or things like that, like a bit.
Yeah, sharing's it's something we've been struggling with for
We talked
years.
about that before, yeah.
Yeah, so basically a few things. So one is you really need a team dedicated to maintaining those components that you want to share and caring for it. The same way that a successful open source project has people that maintain it, a successful shared component has someone that maintains it. Like it really needs to be a project in itself and a product in and of itself. So basically for the components that we do share, you've got something there?
Yeah, I actually have a whole talk on like sharing components and stuff. This was an internal one. But yeah, we have slides on it. We have like, sharing is really hard.
Yeah, I'd say, so the keys are, again, definitely you want a team dedicated to it. Having demo pages is critical. So I always run around and saying—
And great documentation.
like demo-driven development when you're building a shared component is key. So basically, whenever I'm developing a component that I want to share, I also have a demo page of that. And on the demo page will be how can someone use that component, and that provides two pieces of value there. One is, as the developer of that component, if the demo page has every possible instance of it, then as I make changes to it, I can look at the demo page and know, okay, if I were to change something in my component, I can look at the demo page and then trust that every instance is already represented there, so I don't need to then test that component on, say, 10 different websites without the company. The other thing is then, if someone wants to consume that web component, they can go to the demo page and see exactly how that component should be used, what the markup is, and the expected output. So Polymer has some demo pages by default. There's tools like Storybook that can then do demo pages as well. All you really need is just a page that is a way to show your element and the markup and what it should look like. And that is tremendously valuable. Also makes code reviews easy because then you can just go to the demo page and do a code review there. So definitely demo pages, have a team, and then documentation as well as some of the big things. And also make sure when you're sharing it, the biggest thing too is that we've seen is it's almost more like a human problem than a technical problem you need to solve there, because you need people that need to buy into it, and you need, if your goal is consistent UX, you need your UX teams on board with it as well. So basically make sure that you can share this style across the board. But once you're there, the advantage is then if, say, 5 teams are using this custom element you've built, and one team decides I want to change the look of it, as a developer, you're empowered to say, okay, if you want to change it, that's great, but you need to get everybody on board with that change because we've already built it once. It worked across all these sites. Your request to make a change is going to impact everybody. Is that something you want to do? And if that's true, then great, that's okay. But probably it's going to be no, I don't want to do that. So then you can just kind of move on and then focus on what matters, which is building new features and that kind of stuff for your customers.
Good stuff.
What about testing? Both unit testing for maybe a component, but also integration testing. How is Selenium dealing with Shadow DOM?
You want to
That
take
is
that one?
awesome.
Yeah, it
You
is.
want me to cover that one?
You're excited about that one.
Yeah, no.
We've both banged our heads against this one.
So we've been doing custom elements and Shadow DOM for about 3 years, and I'm not up to what happened in the last 6 months. Hopefully, it's a lot better. But once you're in Shadow DOM land, Selenium cannot access your Shadow DOM, and you can't query selector and say, give me something inside of this custom element because the browser doesn't see it anymore. So it's actually pretty difficult to test your custom elements.
It's possible, but it's difficult.
It is possible, but it is difficult. But I think the beauty of it is you're building components. So you're building much smaller pieces that need to work by themselves. So you're testing much smaller units of code. As far as testing the JavaScript, that's real easy to do because it's just JavaScript. It's just classes. So just like you're testing your JavaScript today, you can do the same stuff with custom elements. The harder part is testing the DOM elements and the DOM structure in Selenium. Because again, you don't have access to the shadow root. So what you have to do is you have to do get the custom element and then say custom element dot root dot query selector. And there's ways of traversing the DOM and shadow DOM elements. It's just a little bit more complicated. And I'm hoping that Selenium has fixed that. So originally when Shadow DOM came out, there was a deep selector. So you could actually do CSS /deep/ and it would go through all the Shadow DOM elements as well and query selector everything on the page. And I'm hoping they bring that back because it's really valuable.
Yeah. And just to specifically talk about unit tests, so Chris kind of glossed over it, but you can use whatever you're using for that. So right now, we use Karma
Mocha,
and
Chai,
Mocha and Chai
yeah.
and the C9, and that works fine.
You can use Jest.
Yeah, you can use Jest. There is a web component tester, which we don't use anymore just because it's slow in the fact that it basically spins up uniquely for every test you want to run. So when we have thousands of tests running across our products, and then that takes 40 minutes to run with the web component tester. We converted that to using Karma, and it dropped it down to less than 10 minutes, I think, right now to run all of our tests.
Yeah. So we have about 2 minutes left. You can still ask us more questions. We'll be around. Thank you very much for your time. Feel free to review or give us feedback. We're more than happy to take any critical feedback that you might have.
If you check out the slides too, we've got, at the end of that, there's some links to
We'll
a bunch
tweet out
of
the
resources.
slides.
Yeah, I'll tweet them out too. Good call.
You can follow us on Twitter. I'm Chief CLL.
I'm John Riv.
John Riv. And
Yep.
together we are, I don't know.
I don't know.
We're
Some guy,
developers
yeah.
at Comcast together. Yeah, thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.